Welcome, everyone. Feel free to start putting in the chat where you're coming from, where you're checking in from. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We're going to get started in about 1 minute. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. We are hoping to have a big crowd today. We're thanking you for joining us today. Welcome, welcome. We still have people coming in.
Hello.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to get started with us for our Everyone Leads Leading
Girl, I
Together for
figured
Collective
out
Impact.
I figured out what you said because you ended one message with
And
I be.
we can ask everybody to mute their phones. Thank you. So thank you again for coming today. We are going to have a great event today, and we have our presenter, Paul Schmitz, who will introduce himself briefly later on. Just know that we have Dana and Gina in the background working. If you have any questions or anything, you can put it in the chat. And just want to thank Dana and Gina in advance for doing this for us. As you guys know, SAMHSA pays for all of our events that we bring to you, but it does not mean necessarily that these are SAMHSA's beliefs. So we are happy that SAMHSA allows us to do this type of programming. We have a busy agenda today. So what I'm going to do is just quickly go over, you guys know if you've come to our events before, that NASDAQ uses family-friendly language. And before I do that, I'm sorry, I did not introduce myself. I'm Lachelle Freeman, and I am the project manager here at the National Family Support Technical Assistance Center. But during our webinars, we always want to use trauma-responsive language, strength-based language, avoid blaming caregivers. We want to be inclusive. We want to use person-first language. We also want to be respectful to each other, be non-judgmental, and consistent with our actions. So I will not take up any more of your time. Now I'm going to introduce you guys to the speaker of the webinar, Paul Schmitz.
Hi, everybody. Whoops. Let me get back. Hi, everyone. My name is Paul Schmitz. I'm with the Collective Impact Forum and also have my own consulting practice, Leadership Inside Out. I'm in Milwaukee, and I'm excited to be with you all today. I'm actually flying out later today. So I spent a lot of time on the road, but excited to be home today and able to do this with all of you. Um, I come to my work as someone who has an unusual background, but also I think one that is well suited to talk to this group. I was as a teen, a juvenile delinquent and addict. I went through treatment in my teens. I've been in recovery for many years since. I won't tell you how many because it's ages me too much. I'm also a parent of children who've had mental health issues. My wife on Sunday night took one of our daughter's friends to admit them to a hospital for treatment. So we have experienced these things as parents, personally, in our families, in our extended families and friends. And so appreciate all the work you do because even with my background and experience and knowledge of systems and connections to systems, navigating these issues with children and even with friends' children has been very difficult. So I appreciate all the work you do. My work on this issue began. I'm going to talk first about what collective impact is, which is a big part of what I do today. Began when I was part of something called the White House Council for Community Solutions back in 2010. We were charged by the Domestic Policy Council to figure out how are communities solving problems. And a lot of people had the first thought that what we should be doing is looking for evidence-based solutions. Those programs that in these given cities had accomplished something remarkable, and how do we scale those up and replicate them to as many communities as possible? And something was gnawing at me about this way of looking at social change, and it really hit me the morning of in April in 2010. My hometown, as I said, is Milwaukee, where I live. And the headline in the newspaper that morning was that we had the worst reading scores for African-American children in the country. And I just was shocked by that. But that afternoon, I got a newsletter from the largest youth-serving organization in the city boasting about all the outcomes that the 15,000 children they serve were achieving. And that disconnect really hit me. How could we have all of these programs? And I thought of all the after-school programs I knew, all the nonprofits that were serving. I thought of all these groups, and I knew they were all reporting on outcomes and meeting outcomes and showing progress for the kids who are with them. I'm like, how can we have so much good work happening in the community, and when we add it all up, we still have this result? And so I went back to the council and suggested we ask a different question. Are there cities where reading scores for the whole population are up, not for one program and one unicorn organization, but like, where are cities where teen pregnancy is down, or infant mortality is dropped, or graduation rates are up for the whole community? And right as I began this exploration, this article came out in the Stanford Social Innovation Review called Collective Impact. It wasn't inventing something, it put a language around it, but it was something that emerged in a few cities that asked the same questions we were asking in that I was asking that day, of like, how can we have so many great programs but we're not getting impact? As a White House Council, we looked at 24 cities that had moved a population level measure by 10 points or more. And one of those happened to be my backyard in Milwaukee. In 2006, when this effort began, Milwaukee's teen pregnancy rate was 2.5 times the national average. And I just want to repeat that from 2.5 times the national average. Just think of that, like the average of everybody, and we're way up here, just off the charts. And the health department United Way had been funding programs, and those programs, again, are achieving outcomes and doing what seems like good work, but the data and the result is still miserable for the city. And so they held a summit that brought everybody together. And the first thing they recognized is almost everyone in the room served girls, and they realized there was another part of the problem. But they also began work on and developed 3 strategies that they would do comprehensively throughout the city in a partnership between schools and organizations and local governments and businesses and others. And together, this campaign and effort led to over a 70% decline over the next decade, even before the national rate started dropping, and much faster and further than the national rate drop. But that's what collective impact's about. It's not about how do we partner together in a new way. It's about how do you move the needle on an issue? How do you actually get to that change? We define collective impact as a network of community members, organizations, or institutions that advance equity by learning together, aligning, and integrating action to achieve population and systems change. And breaking this down a bit, the ultimate aim of doing collective impact is to move population and systems change. That we're trying to move not just outcomes for one program, we're trying to move, like, how do we, for a neighborhood or a city or a county, move the population level data? The reason why equity is in the center of the definition is you can't move population change unless you address issues of equity within the population, that you have to take on the disparities that exist within the population. If you can't move the people who are furthest behind forward, you're not going to get to the population change. So you've got to be aware of where there are disparities in the population and be able to move those. And the work is learning, aligning, and integrating. It's not getting together to talk about what you already did. It's rolling up your sleeves together and figuring out how do we actually work together in a new and different way. There's 5 elements of that we typically think of with collective impact in terms of how it's organized. First, there's a common agenda, which is a strategy that's at the scale needed to move the population change. So if I'm trying to move, uh, decrease the rate of infant mortality, and it's highest in 6 zip codes where there's 18,000 women with childbearing age, I can't have a strategy that's for 30 people here and 50 people. It's like, what would the strategy need to be to really move at a level of 18,000 people? What would we really need to do at that level to move it? Once we have that agenda and strategy, then we have to measure data in real time to see how we're doing. We're not measuring on the back end to evaluate what we did. We're measuring in real time to see what we're doing and be able to manage and coordinate our work around that. So we know, are certain schools getting gains and others aren't? Are we seeing changes in birth outcomes this month? Whatever it is that we're using data on a regular basis to manage. The third is mutually enforcing activities, and this is about how we integrate the work. And so in my city, there's now a one-stop shop for eviction help. In the past, if someone was being evicted and their things were put on the curb and the sheriff's there, they call the 211 helpline and they're given numbers for shelters, they're given numbers for food, they're given numbers for places they can take their kids, storage, and legal support. And they've got to call these places and figure it out while they're in crisis. Now, because it's collective effort, they go to one place, which is physical by phone or internet, and they have a triage team that assesses what they need and brings together, because they have a bunch of organizations working together, figures out which organizations are going to work together to serve this family and build that around them. That's what we mean by mutually enforcing, is that it's not people having to deal with different organizations, the idea that we work as a system. To do all this takes a lot of communication and engagement among partners, and it takes management. And that's what a backbone staff does. They coordinate and manage the collective to be able to move forward that common agenda. So that's what we typically think of when we think of what collective impact is. It's a different way of working than we're used to. Most people grow up in organizations, and they're used to the idea that the organization creates a vision. They develop strategies. They implement those strategies on their own. They manage their staff to implement the strategies. It's all done within an organization. Collective impact's done in a network, which is very different. And so the mental model difference is that we use is between the Marriott and Airbnb. And this is not an endorsement of either brand or company, but just as a metaphor. If you think of a Marriott, and I'll be staying at one tonight, I've stayed in a lot of them all over the country. They all look the same. And someone centrally is deciding what shampoos in the bathroom and what the thread count of the sheets are and what kind of pillows there are. And they can control all that because they're an organization. And that's what we're used to, is being in organizations where we can control things, we manage things. But a network is more like Airbnb. In that case, Airbnb can't control what shampoos in the bathroom, what thread count of the sheets there are. All they can do is create a platform and standards and support people to achieve those standards together. And that's more what leading a network is like. It's not the same as leading an organization where you can control the inputs and outputs. It's where you have to build platforms where you can guide people to achieve standards together. Again, like another way is that typically the leader of an organization sets the vision, and collective impact, a leader facilitates a network to create a collective vision for the work. Typically in an organization, we aim at outcomes that we can achieve within our organization, whereas in collective impact, we're aiming at population level outcomes. An organization develops and delivers programs, maybe with some collaboration, where in this case, partners are owning and implementing and coordinating a strategy that is beyond their organization that they're doing with others. And finally, we're used to advisory boards and committees where we come together, hear what staff are doing, and maybe give some advice and counsel. Whereas in collective impact networks, it's an action team where we're coming together to coordinate what we do when we go back to our agencies. We're not advising the staff what to do. we're learning and figuring out what we're going to do when we leave that meeting and go back to our agencies, and how our agencies' services and programs and things might shift or change in the coming time. So that's kind of the basics. And there's three kind of key lessons we've had after a number of years of doing collective impact. The first is that the strategy, the clearer the strategy is, the easier it is to get people to commit and stay together doing this work. That when the strategies are very vague or aspirational or very activity-based and they don't seem to add up, people don't stay as committed and aren't willing to do the sacrifice needed to do this work well. But when the strategy is clear, people are going to commit more. The second is that the form of collective impact, how it looks, will always be based on the strategy. You build the strategy and then figure out how to organize people to do it. You don't build all the groups and then decide what the strategy is. And finally, culture eats strategy for breakfast. That you can build a great strategy, you can build a great forum, but you have to build a leadership culture that supports collaboration. So I'm going to walk through these first two pretty quickly, and then we're going to spend most of today talking about culture, because leadership is really the key part that makes this work, and we have to think differently about leadership, and we'll be doing that in this workshop. So let me just quickly guide through these first two. The clear strategy guides clear commitment. And here it's just that what we find is that what's important is that there's clear results and indicators that people care about. When I told the story about infant mortality or about a city's reading scores, people understand what that means, and people understand that it's urgent, and people can see, and there's indicators that we can see how we're doing at a population level. That when you have that clarity of a resultant indicator, that gets people more committed. The second is that the strategies have to add up with metrics and visible progress. Again, if we're trying to move a population change, if we're trying to improve reading scores for children in the community, and we need to move 600 more kids a year to grade level, our strategies have to be enough to move 600 more kids to grade level. It can't be, again, a little piecemeal across organizations. Like, what would it really take to move at the level of 600? And then we have to have work plans that make it clear who needs to do what across all our partners by when, so we can manage coordination and implementation across organizations. So that's just a little of what it means to have a clear strategy in this work. The second is about the form of collective impact. And typically, a collective impact has three roles. One is the steering committee, which is the governing body. But it's important to note, they're not a separate group. Typically, the steering committee has members, has the leadership of the work groups on it, and a diverse array of leaders who give them enough knowledge of the issue, the neighborhoods they're serving, and the people that they can make the best decisions about the group. But they are the stewards of the common agenda created by the whole network. Then there are work groups, and work groups typically are groups that are formed to implement one or more strategy together. And then there's some work groups, and that's what the orange one represents, that are more functional. There might be a data and evaluation work group or an advocacy work group that work across the whole collective. But the backbone staff, again, which is that third role, is what is coordinating the flow of information and coordination across all of these groups to keep everyone rowing in the same direction. There's four key lessons we've learned about shaping a collective impact. One, as I said before, is you build the tables around the strategies, not the strategies around the tables. You build a network, the network decides what the agenda is, and then you organize that network, and maybe some people who helped design it aren't right to continue, and you have to bring new people in, but you then build the tables to do it. The second is that the roles should have clearly defined descriptions, and that people can be held accountable to, that people commit to and can be held accountable to. Third is to think strategically and inclusively about who can contribute to results. That we found a lot of surprises in community where all of a sudden barbershops are serving as library hubs, or where local community folks are doing mental health first aid with folks and others, and like thinking about how do we reach, or older mothers are reaching out to young mothers in a neighborhood on birth outcomes. There's lots of ways that we can think about how community contributes. And finally, we have to manage the communication flow across. So that's just a little bit about collective impact, just to share a little bit about the context in which I work on. But what I want to focus on mostly today is this idea of leadership culture and what kind of leadership it takes to do this work well And by leadership, I don't mean the leader. I mean how people have to lead together to move change together in their communities. And so we're going to go into a breakout for about the next 10 minutes. And what we're going to ask you to do is we're going to ask you to think about, when was the first time that you stepped up for yourself, another person, or a cause you cared about? So we want you to think about and share a story, and we'll share why that story is important when we come back. But what we want to do is make sure, and I just put the question in the chat as well. We want you in your breakouts to be able to share that story with each other and think back just the earliest memory of when you stepped up for yourself, another person, or something you cared about. And then we'll see you in about 10 minutes.
You should have seen a little button that says join. So hit that button that says join. If you just joined us, we're in breakout rooms. You should see a little button pop up that says join, and you can join that room. If you are still here in the main session with us, I'm going to move you to a different room so that you get that button again in case you missed it, but you do need to hit that join button to go into the breakout room. Hi, Lisa. We have just gotten into some breakout rooms, so I'm going to put you in a breakout room.
And I'll re-add the question to the chat so you can see what people are talking about. So Dana, did you see my chat message?
I do see that. There should be a timer showing.
Um, okay, yes, but also above that, you can click a thing that automatically sends people. I find it gets really hard when people have to click join, and you end up with a lot of people. Whereas
Yes.
if you click the thing, it just sends people and it's instant, and then everyone's in
Yes.
the breakout rooms right away.
I will do that for the next one. Thank
Great.
you.
Okay, you're welcome. Whew. And Dane, if you can make not send the co-hosts to the breakout rooms,
Okay.
because I don't want to be sent into a breakout during the breakouts.
Okay.
You can click that on the first page of the breakout room thing when you're setting it up.
Yes, I will do that
Great.
too.
Thank you. It keeps asking me to go into a room, and I'm like, I'm not.
Oh, it's probably me because I'm trying to
That's
send
all
it
right.
again to the people who
All
have
good.
not yet joined.
Yeah. All right. You often get a lot of the double muting,
What do you mean?
uh, where both the visual and the audio is muted. Black screens with names.
Oh, no, I don't. Hi, Adam. We are in breakout rooms, so I am going to assign you to a breakout room. We have about 5 minutes left in those breakout rooms.
So I just stay here.
You should have gotten a little button that says join if you want to head into a breakout room to join a conversation. But you're welcome to
Yeah,
stay here too.
yeah. I think because I missed. Sorry, I missed the
That's
lead in.
okay.
Mr. Schmitz, is that asset based group? Is that based at DePaul?
So the Ask-Based Community Development Institute is based at DePaul, and
Great,
it used to be at Northwestern,
that's
and
right. After John McKnight died, and
well, Jody Kretzmann died. John McKnight's still with us.
he is okay. Sorry about
Yes,
that.
he's in his 90s. Yeah, I'm trying to remember how far he's into his. He's pretty far in now. But no, John has not passed. Jody passed in January 1st, 2023.
Thanks for correcting me.
No problem.
Who can take classes there? Do you have to be enrolled in the university?
The institute's not. It's just located there. It's not a university. Like it's not an undergraduate program. It's like a. It's a it used to be. It's basically provides opportunities for training to anybody, and you don't enroll through the university or anything. It's just located there.
Thanks.
So yeah, they have their website usually has different training opportunities and things they're offering and ways to get involved.
I think we had a couple people join us. We are just wrapping up some breakout rooms and then we'll continue on with our webinar. Hi, TW. We are in some breakout rooms, about 30 seconds left there, and folks will be coming back.
Yeah, I got kicked off, and I'm
Oh.
not sure what happened. I was on, and then it just kicked me off.
No worries. No worries at all. I'll just leave you here because the breakouts are going to close very soon.
Okay, thanks.
Give people just a moment to come back.
Yep, we've got about 25 seconds before everyone will be just swept back in.
Great. Are we all in?
Yes, everyone's back now.
Okay. Welcome back. So let me just get the screen up. So the reason why I start with that activity is, as you may have seen in my bio, I wrote a book several years ago called Everyone Leads, Building Leadership from the Community Up. And what it doesn't mean is that everyone should lead at the same time. What it means is that leadership is like a muscle, and everyone has that muscle. And that the goal of any community is to help as many people practice and exercise that muscle, because like anyone else, like any other muscle in our body, the more you exercise it, the more you practice it, the stronger it gets. And that first time you stepped up, whether it was to a bully in school or to a teacher or on an issue to your parents or got involved in a cause that you cared about, whatever that first time is that you stepped up, that's when you started building the muscle. And the goal, again, of any organization or community is how do you build collective leadership muscle? How do you have as many people as possible exercising that muscle to create change together? The way that we came to define leadership, and I led a leadership development organization for 20 years before I began my collective impact work, is to first think of the verb rather than the noun. To think of lead as an action people take, not a position few can hold. When you think of the verb instead of the noun, it really opens up the possibility of who can participate. The second is, what is the core of leadership? The act is an act of responsibility. It's stepping up to own a result. It's being willing to do whatever you have to do, learn what you have to learn, work with who you have to work with, but you're willing to do what it takes to make something happen. There's a goal that you share in common with others, and you're willing to take responsibility to make that happen and get people involved in making that happen. And that's the responsibility of leadership. That's why no one can really give you leadership, and no one's really entitled to leadership. It's responsibility that people have to own and take responsibility for. But then if you think about those leaders you most admire or those you don't, or the best boss you ever had or the worst, or any of those differences, it's usually not the skills that differentiate a leader, it's their values. How they listen to others, how they engage with others, how they collaborate, how they hold themselves accountable, how they are they ethical in what they do. It's typically the values that define leadership, because to get things done, if I'm taking responsibility to move something, to make something happen, I've got to get people to work with me. And it's my values that make people want to work with me and believe in working with me to accomplish that common goal. Yet we often talk about building leadership skills when the essence of leadership is really in the values. But I want to step back for a moment and just take on this idea of collective leadership. When I talk about people leading together or exercising leadership together, it sometimes can be confusing. But I want to tell you a story. And it's a story you all know, but I'm going to tell it to you in a way you might not have heard it before, that I think illustrates the idea of collective leadership more than any story that I can tell. And it's the story of Mrs. Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott. And we have to begin with Mrs. Parks. She was a lifelong rebel and radical. As a child, she got into fights when mistreated. She always stood up for herself. In 1932, she fell in love with her husband, Raymond, who was a barber. Because of his activism, he had been involved in a case called the Scottsboro 9 case, in which 9 young men had been falsely accused of rape. And he became a community organizer in that effort. And she said he was the first person that she fell in love with him because of his activism, and he was the first person radical enough for her to marry. In 1943, they went to their first NAACP meeting. The NAACP at that time had been the professional class of African Americans. But Rosa Parks and her husband were working class folks, and they found out that E.D. Nixon was running to be president of the local chapter. If elected, he'd be a first working class president of an NAACP in the country. He was a porter on trains. And sure enough, they go to their first meeting, pay their dues, and Nixon's elected president. But no one runs to be secretary. And Rosa Parks is the only woman at the meeting that night. And sort of first ever meeting, she gets railroaded into becoming the secretary of the NAACP chapter, a position she holds for the next 12 years. And it's important to just pause on a moment that in this role as secretary, it was her job to document all the cases of mistreatment, discrimination, abuse, and terrorism in the community for over a decade. She was the documenter of the community stories. Through the NAACP, she went to trainings in Georgia and Florida by the master organizer, Ella Baker, who was the national field director of the NAACP and had been building a movement of leaders throughout the South to work on civil rights. And she became a mentor of Rosa Parks and, among other things, encouraged her to create a youth council in Montgomery, which she did, in which she would meet with young people on Sunday afternoons and work with them on ways to stand up to segregation. Then one day she was working in her role as a seamstress for Clifford and Virginia Dewar, who are kind of the town's leading white liberals, and they were talking to her about her NAACP work when they encouraged her to go to the Highlander Folk School in Tennessee, which ran trainings in nonviolent civil disobedience for diverse groups of activists from the South. And when she expressed interest in going, Virginia Dewar raised money among her friends to sponsor Rosa Parks to go to Highlander and actually traveled to Knoxville, Tennessee with her by bus to make sure she got there safely. At Highlander, she was trained by Satima Clark and Miles Horton, who also became important mentors of hers and began corresponding with her and supporting her work in Montgomery. She said that Highlander had a profound impact on her life, and that was the first time she had lived in an interracial community where everyone was truly treated equally, and it inspired her to do more. That same year, a young lawyer moved to Montgomery, Fred Gray, who was 24 years old. He was the first African-American lawyer in Montgomery and the second in the state of Alabama. And Rosa Parks took him under her wing and every week would have lunch with him and brought him all these cases she'd been documenting to see which ones they could turn into legal cases they could prosecute under the law. Then in February of 1955, Claudette Colvin, who was a 15-year-old member of Rosa Parks Youth Council, refused to move to the back of the bus and was arrested. Now, if I could see you all, I'd ask you to raise your hand if you've heard her name, but not a lot of people have. The Rosa Parks, Virginia Dewar, and others thought they should use her case to challenge the segregated system in Montgomery, but the lawyers decided she wasn't sympathetic enough. They said she was too poor. They said she was too dark-skinned. They said she allegedly resisted arrest. She was a teen. There were rumors about her, and they decided not to take her case. 8 months later, in October of 1955, Mary Louise Smith, an 18-year-old former member of Rosa Parks Youth Council, refuses to move to the back of the bus in Montgomery and gets arrested. Once again, Rosa Parks and others thought they should take this case, but the lawyers decided again she wasn't sympathetic. They said she was too poor. Her father was a drunk. They decided not to take her case. 5 weeks later, on Thursday night, December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks refuses to move to the back of the bus and gets arrested. Now, it's important to note, this was the second time she had done this, was the second time she had been removed from that bus by that bus driver for refusing to move. It wasn't the first time she did. It was the first time she was arrested, but she'd done it before. The second thing to just note is that in the popular literature, in kids' textbooks today, in the obituaries when she died, even the White House proclamation on the 100th anniversary of birth, she's often referred to this day as an accidental activist or someone who inadvertently started a movement. How accidental does she sound at this point? So Edie Nixon and Clifford Virginia Dewar go to get her out of jail and spend the next few hours with her and Raymond talking about the idea of using her case to challenge segregation. She and Raymond agree to do this. And in doing this, they made the courageous choice because they lost everything. They lost their jobs, they lost their house, they lost everything in support of the movement. Then Edie Nixon calls Fred Gray and asks him to represent his friend Rosa Parks in court that Monday. And then he called Joanna Robinson. Joanna Robinson was head of the Women's Political Council. Again, this is a Thursday night. And he contacts her and asks her if she can organize all these women to get flyers out tomorrow and advertise a bus boycott on Monday. The Women's Political Council, which was an association of professional Black women, had been urging the male-dominated NAACP for 2 years to organize a bus boycott. And so she's excited to do this, and she goes back. She's his English professor at Alabama State University, a historically Black college, but a state institution. And overnight, she prints 35,000 flyers. And I want to repeat that, 35,000 flyers. If I asked you, any of you, to do that today with all the technology we have, you'd freak out. She did this on 1955 technology with a hand crane. And they made another 17,000 flyers the next day to hand out during the afternoon rush hour. And this was done on state paper, state ink, and state equipment. And that morning, Friday morning, all the women from the council met her early and got all these copies. They fanned all the bus stops in Montgomery with these announcements for the boycott. Then, and this is absolutely true and how it happened, Edie Nixon called Reverend Ralph Abernathy at First Street Baptist Church and asked him if he could organize a meeting of pastors in town that Friday afternoon, so on Sunday from the pulpit they could all call for the boycott. And Abernathy famously says, "I've got a better idea. There's this young new pastor in town and no one knows him. Let's do the meeting at his church because if he gets chased out of town, no one will notice." And that is literally how 26-year-old Martin Luther King got drafted in the movement. They met at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church that afternoon. It was the first time most of the pastors had met Dr. King, and they're impressed by the young man, but he was young. He was 26 years old. He was new to town. But they all agree to call for the boycott. One white pastor attends that meeting, Robert Gratz. His home is bombed when it's found out that he attended. That Monday, no one rode the buses. Everyone walked. They walked to school, they walked to work, and that night, they walked to Holt Street Baptist Church where over 5,000 people showed up for a mass meeting. And they agreed that they wanted to continue the boycott. And so that night at the meeting, they decided to form an organization and manage the boycott, which became the Montgomery Improvement Association. Rufus Lewis had lost several elections to Edie Nixon to run the NAACP. He was a business owner. He was college educated. He'd been the winning football coach of Alabama State University. And he didn't like the idea that he, an educated business owner, was losing to an unlearned reporter on trains. And he didn't want Nixon to run this new group as well. So he hatches a plan with Joanna Robinson and others that night and goes before the audience and says, "We're too divided as a community. We have too many factions. If we're going to hold together to do this, we need someone neutral to lead us." And with hopes of pulling strings behind the scenes because he's a deacon at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, he recommends his young new pastor, Martin Luther King, as that neutral leader, which is how King that night becomes head of the MIA. King then called his father, who at the time was the most prominent pastor in Atlanta, who connected him to a pastor in Baton Rouge where there already had been a bus boycott. This wasn't the first. That pastor said, "Well, people will walk for maybe a week, and then you got to figure out how to get them everywhere." And so King appoints Rufus Lewis transportation manager, and they create a 350-car carpool that transported the entire community of school, church, work, and shopping from stops throughout the city for 12 months. They created effectively a taxi and bus system that was informal throughout the community that worked for a year. To raise money for this, two women, Inez Ricks and Georgia Gilmore, created competing clubs of women who made and sold food every week and would compete to see who brought the most money to the mass meetings to support all of the drivers with their gas costs and all the tickets police kept giving them. Then Ella Baker and Rosa Parks raised money from NAACP donors. The Hordens and the Dewars hit up the Highlander community to come to Montgomery to support them. And then Baird Rustin came to town. Baird Rustin had been a controversial figure. He had been the campus organizer for the Communist Party in the 1930s, and we're now in the McCarthy 50s. He was a follower of Gandhi after that in India, and then sat out World War II in jail as a pacifist and conscientious objector to violence. And he was an openly gay black man in 1955, New York. They called him Brother Outsider. But at that time, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters Union, of which E.D. Nixon was a member, was the largest black union in the country and the most power. And its leader, A. Philip Randolph, was really the dean of civil rights leadership in the first half of the 20th century. And his master organizer and strategist was Rustin. So he sends down Rustin to meet with Nixon and see how they can support the Montgomery effort. And Rustin meets with Nixon and he takes him to meet Dr. Martin Luther King. He goes to King's home. There's a man on the roof with a shotgun and Dr. King carrying a sidearm. And he talks to him about the idea of using a Gandhian nonviolent civil disobedience campaign in Montgomery. King had read Gandhi in graduate school and was quite excited. And Rustin said, first, no more weapons. Get rid of all the guns. Up to that point, all the marchers had carried weapons to protect themselves against the white supremacists. And he said, secondly, 85 members of the Montgomery Improvement Association have been indicted by the local police. Can you have them put on their Sunday best, march down to the jail and turn themselves in, which they did. It was the first mass civil disobedience of the movement. But they were worried that this gay former communist pacifist from New York would be found behind the scenes. So he moves into a hotel room in Birmingham, where he coaches and counsels King every day for the next year. In fact, for the next 13 years. He's the man who organized the March on Washington and much else. There's actually a Netflix movie last year about his effort to create the March on Washington. And he and Ella Baker co-found the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and Ella Baker becomes its first executive director to create a movement coming out of Montgomery. But Rosa Parks had been an officer in the NAACP for over a decade. Her husband had once been involved in an effort funded by the Communist Party. So deciding that she also isn't a sympathetic enough figure to win a national case on civil rights. So yet another woman who refused to move to the back of the bus and was arrested, Aurelia Browder, it was her case that went up to the U.S. Supreme Court that overturned segregation in the South. So my question to you is, who is the leader of the Montgomery bus boycott? Recognizing the collective leadership of this group, and I could make this circle larger, doesn't diminish the immense genius of Dr. King or the immense courage of Rosa Parks. They played particularly important leadership roles in the movement. But even in their own stories of the movement, they would talk about the other leaders. It was a collection of people who each took responsibility for their contribution to the ultimate result. And each of them, using their leadership abilities and skills from where they were able together to move that change. And that's what I mean by collective leadership and everyone leads, is how do we create tables where lots of people can lead together? The next part is really about the values. And I'm going to talk about 5 values that we found are most effective for people trying to lead community change. And the first one is being asset-based. And that's going to lead us to our next breakout. What we're going to ask you to do in just a moment is to go into rooms. And let me just stop the share. And what we're going to do is invite you in your rooms to each answer 3 questions. And this comes from a story I'll tell afterward that's kind of fun. But what we're going to do is ask you to each introduce yourselves to everyone in your group based on the answer to these. Whoops, it didn't go to everyone. Whoops, let me go back to the whole group. So we're going to ask you to introduce yourself to your partners in your room based on the answer to these 3 questions. I'm going to tell you the story of where these came from. So we're going to break you up right now for about 10 minutes, and then we'll see you after that.
Sorry, folks, we had a couple people join us that we need to assign to breakout rooms. If you'll give me just 1 second, I'll get you into those breakout rooms.
Great. Thank you.
you're still with us, you might be on a device that does not support breakout rooms. Oh, I see. Some of you do not wish to be in a breakout room, so you are here with us for a few minutes. Understood. If anyone's having trouble getting into your breakout room, you can send me a private chat as well.
I'm sorry, Dana. I didn't hear the last part you just said before sending the private chat, but I came back because my group didn't have a leader, I don't think, and so we didn't have the questions.
Oh, okay. There are no leaders.
Oh,
The questions were put in the chat. I will put those in the chat again.
sorry about that.
That's all right. It looks like we have quite a few people coming back to the main room. If you're having technical difficulties or you're confused about the instructions, let us know. Stacy, did you
So
get
nobody
kicked out?
ever entered my room. It was just me.
It was just you. Well, we'll get you somewhere else. Let's
Thank
see.
you.
Yeah, no problem. Which room were you in, Stacy?
4, I believe.
4. Got it. Yeah. Yeah, you're alone there. That's strange. Okay. Sent you
Excuse
somewhere
me.
else. Yes, ma'am.
It booted me out. I was trying to, it was I was joining room 23. That's what it said. And
Okay.
it booted me out.
All right, let's try a different room then. We're gonna try room 20. And Candelaria, were you also booted out and came back, or have you just joined us?
I just joined. I joined late.
Okay,
My apologies.
that's okay. We are in some breakout rooms for about 5.5 more minutes, so I will go ahead and move you into one of those breakout rooms.
Can I be moved into one as well? I'm sorry, I don't know how to get back
You
to when I
can
was
know.
in.
Absolutely, you definitely can. Do you happen to remember which room you were in before?
I want to say 12.
Yes, I found you. I'm going to move you into one. Just one second. Okay. And yes, I've gotten a couple of messages that the folks that are here in the main room with us prefer not to go into a breakout room. But if you do want to go to a breakout room, just let me know. Hi, Patricia. Are you just joining us, or were you in a breakout room and you got booted out? Well, we are in breakout rooms for about 4 more minutes. I'll just leave you here for now, Patricia, but if you'd like to join one, please let us know.
Thanks, Dana, for changing it to 30 seconds.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I missed that in the front of show.
Otherwise, you wait a long time between the people coming back. Yeah, that's great.
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Thank you. We're just waiting for the rest of the group to come back. Everyone will be back in about 10 seconds. Great, thank you. And welcome back. Someone's got me on there's an echo coming. All right. So about 30 years ago, there was a pastor who was new to his congregation, and his congregation operated a soup kitchen. And when he went to see the soup kitchen in action, he found it very depressing. And he met with the volunteers from his congregation to find out like how they operated things. And one of the things they told him is not only did they provide people food, but they would identify what other needs people had and refer them to other services. And they shared that they did this through an intake form that they used to interview people. And he asked to see it. And he looked at the interview questions, and they were all about what was wrong with people, what they lacked, what they didn't have, what was wrong with them. And he thought about it and said, so the way we start a relationship is by finding out everything that's wrong with them. And the only thing that they know that we know about them is what's wrong with them. And he said he chucked it in the garbage and came up with a new intake process. And it was these 3 questions. And every time someone came for a meal, they were introduced to the group based on the answer to these 3 questions. And what happened is people started talking to each other. They started building relationships with each other. They found things they had in common. It changed the entire environment. And people began connecting with each other. They took Polaroids of people. For you young people, you can Google what that is, and put them on the wall. And they created a wall of fame, and with a list of people's gifts. And his challenge to his congregation was no longer to feed people, it was to build relationships with people. And he took what had been a church community, a church basement community, and created one community that went on to do other community building work. And what he was teaching us was something we call being asset-based. And it answers the age-old question, is the glass half empty or half full? And the correct answer, of course, is yes. The glass is both. It's like every single one of us, everyone we work with, everyone we serve. We all have fullness. We all have the things you just shared with each other in the Zoom rooms. We also, though, have emptiness, things we don't do well, mistakes we've made, regrets we hold. But community service is often about people who've been defined by their fullness going into communities that have been defined by their emptiness to help people who've often been labeled by their emptiness with the notion we're supposed to fill them up with some of our fullness. We think that at best that's arrogant and at worst oppressive, and that great leaders are those who, even when staring into an individual or community's emptiness, can find the fullness. We never define somebody by the biggest mistake they've ever made because we don't want to be defined by that. We always recognize that people have both and hold both. And when we hold that view, it enables us to see the potential in people that we might otherwise miss. It also allows us to see communities differently. So I can go into most American communities and I can find all of these things. They're there if I look for them. But in every community I can find all these things, I can find all of these things as well. And the question is, what lens am I bringing when I'm working with a community? If I only see this lens, then the way I approach solving problems in that community is going to be, we need outsiders to come in and fix these things. If I also see these things, then I think about how I can use these gifts of people in the community in partnership and work with them to address these needs. And so the first step of being asset-based is how we have a relationship to it. But the second is to think about how we work in community and how we engage community to work together to solve problems. We like the spectrum, which came from the International Association of Public Participation. That's kind of simple in a way. It says that there's 5 ways that organizations or groups often engage a community. The first is inform. That means we make decisions and we inform the community about those decisions. Consult means that before we make final decisions, we listen to the community, and that's our responsibility to let people know how their input shaped our decision. Involve is that we work with community every step of the way, from defining the problem to looking at options for solving it to making decisions, and we've involved community every step of the way. Collaborate is truly co-equal. It means that we, community, are full partners with organizations in solving problems, from our governance tables that make decisions to our staffing and everything, that we've got community involved at every level. And empower means community makes decisions and we support whatever decisions they make. The challenge we see is people love to use language on the right side of the spectrum while they deliver engagement on the left side. And our belief is that not everyone has to be an empower or even collaborate. Our experience with most groups we work with is they want to end up somewhere near involve or collaborate. But wherever one ends up, the important thing is to make that promise and fulfill that promise, because the worst thing you can do is promise more than you're going to do, which just frustrates people and pisses them off. But to make clear the promise of how you're going to engage people and then fulfill that promise. The second value is about equity and inclusion. And at the Collective Impact Forum, after 10 years of doing this work, we were asked to author a 10th anniversary article in the Stanford Social Innovation Review about what we had learned. And we decided the most important lesson we learned was about the importance of centering equity in this work. We define equity as fairness and justice achieved through systematically assessing disparities in opportunities, outcomes, and representation, and redressing them through targeted actions. What this means is there's 5 practices we look at. The first is grounding the work in data and context and target solutions, disaggregating data on our issue and understanding how different populations in our community are affected. In some communities, in many American communities, it'll be by race, by some it's by gender, by some it's by zip code. But looking at disaggregating data to understand where there are disparities, where there are populations further behind, and recognizing that we have to target solutions differently to different populations within our community to move everyone to the result that we want everyone to get to. To do that, we also have to focus on systems changes in addition to programs and services. Think about the things that hold the problem in place, whether it's the narratives and stories people believe or the lack of information people have, or it's the way systems don't work together, like in that eviction example I gave you, or who's making decisions, or the rules about resources or public policies. It's those kind of systems changes that often get in the way. The third is about shifting power within a collaborative, that we have a collaborative that's doing work. How are we making sure that the decision-making power is more balanced and involves those who are from the community, involves those who bring different perspectives, and isn't the usual tables we bring together. Listening and acting with community, which we just talked about, becomes another key practice in that. And then making sure that we make commitments and fulfill them around how we're practicing equity within our coalitions. The third is about trust. And in our experience, there's certain practice that trust doesn't just happen in a group. It's something that has to be nurtured, built, and often repaired for people to work together well. And there's practices that we found really support people building trust. One is that the more authentic and self-aware and sincere people are, that builds trust. When people know who you are, why you're doing the work, why you care, when they know your story, when they know the values you hold, that helps people trust you. When you recognize others' assets, we all know this, that if I give you negative feedback or disagree with you, but you know that I value you and see what you bring, you're going to hear that differently than if you don't know that. And so it builds trust to recognize others' assets. They know that you see what's good in them, especially when you get into situations where you have to disagree. Expressing empathy and centering others and not making it about you, but understanding where people are at, asking where people are at, checking in with people, that builds trust. Having agreements, ground rules for a group, or other things that hold us, that we can hold each other accountable for, that builds trust. Obviously, being reliable, doing what we say we're going to do and getting it done on time. And if we're repairing trust, we often have to narrate that and make sure that people are seeing that we're getting that done. It has to be visible. Consultation. Anybody who's managed people knows if you have an employee who checks in on your expectations, checks in on their progress, asks questions when they get stuck, it's very easy to manage them. Someone who doesn't check in when they get stuck, doesn't check in on expectations, doesn't let you know progress, you're going to end up micromanaging. The more someone consults, the more you can trust that they're going to get done what they're going to get done. And if they get stuck, they're going to come to you. You can trust them to go out and do more. Transparency, again, clearly a key part of trust, that there can't be a sense that there's a meeting before the meeting, that there's a real meeting, or that some people are getting information others aren't getting. And finally, taking responsibility, that we own when we make mistakes, when we fail, we explain what we've learned and how things are going to be different, that we take responsibility for those things. That's a key part of building and especially repairing trust. If we don't own when things go wrong and what our contributions to those mistakes or errors or failures are, and show how we've changed, then people can't trust us to do differently in the future. So these are things that any group can use to support and build trust. The fourth is continuous learning. And about 10 years ago, the Echoing Green Foundation, which funds social entrepreneurs around the world who are starting new organizations, asked me to come and share with them how I built my previous organization that I used to lead, Public Allies. And I started writing this presentation about what we did and realized that wouldn't help people. And instead created a presentation called The Worst Practices of Social Entrepreneurship, where I cataloged the 10 biggest mistakes I or my organization made that we would do over if we could. And before sharing this publicly, I thought I should share it with our staff, but I was kind of scared because the first slide in the deck was called Things I Suck At. And the reason is, as I thought about my journey as a leader in the first 10 years of leading this organization, I realized if I'd been more self-aware of these things, I would have hired better, I would have delegated better, I would have collaborated better, I'd been less defensive, I would have gained tools, I would have been such a better leader. But putting this list in front of my employees was really scary, and then something happened. Everyone started nodding. And the reason is because the things you suck at aren't a secret. If you're always late, everyone knows it. If you're a procrastinator, people see it. If you talk too much and dominate meetings, people know you do it. And the reality is that if you own it, you create the space that people can talk about it with you, give you feedback, offer help. If you don't own it, we talk about it without you, right? Why are we in the parking lot complaining about Frank after the meeting? If Frank just said, listen, I could talk too much and dominate. If I'm taking over, let me know. He just saved us like 20 hours of parking lot time this year, right? When we own these things, it creates the possibility again that people can talk to us about them. When we don't own them, we only talk about them behind people's backs, and that produces nothing of value. So as leaders, we have to be confident about what we bring and have humility about what we don't. And we have to be able to ask for help and ask for feedback on those things we struggle with. And the same thing applies to organizations. We have to be confident about the things we do well and have humility about what we don't do well. The core of collaboration and why we have to collaborate is none of us have the full package. And we've got to be aware of both parts of our glass to do that. And finally, there's accountability. And to us, accountability is really, if leadership is an act of responsibility, the price is accountability. And we've got to be accountability to ourselves, to our own purpose and values, to the people we work with on the promises we make and the commitments we make, but ultimately to the people we serve and the people whose lives we're trying to change. And we've got to be aware of those. And so if we think of this collective work as being about having clear strategies and having form, but especially building a culture that supports leaders to work together most effectively because they see assets in each other in their communities, because they understand equity and how to make sure that those populations who've been excluded or furthest behind, that we can bring them forward, who understand how to build trust in a group, who have the humility to ask questions and learn and own when we make mistakes, and finally to be accountable. That's what builds the kind of leadership that solves these problems. And so with that, I'm going to stop and invite some questions for the next 15 minutes or so before we close out.
And you guys, we didn't get any questions in the chat, but you guys can raise your hand to ask a question.
Yeah, happy to take in the chat alive, please.
I'm sorry.
Brenda, please.
Okay. I don't know. Are there any good books that you would recommend that we could read based on just your presentation, like just to...
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking over because I'm surrounded by books. I'm trying to think of which shelf I should look at, but some books that have really influenced me is I think that the practice of adaptive leadership is something I've used a lot in thinking about leading groups and managing groups and working with groups through difficult problems. I think that I think Brene Brown's Dare to Lead is a great book in terms of thinking about empathy and trust and shame and how you build trust and empathy as leaders and what it means to do that. I think that's a great guide. I think that it's funny. I have a chapter in my book where I walk through a bunch of different leadership books, and one of them that comes to mind right now is Bill George's True North. And then at least in my case, I'm a big history reader, as you might have seen in the earlier conversation. And there's a whole lot of books I read about social change and history of social change that I found inspiring. Taylor Branch's trilogy about the civil rights movement is a great one. And there's a great biography of Rosa Parks by Jean Theoharis called The Rebellious Life of Mrs. Rosa Parks. That's a great book about her life that inspired me along with Taylor Branch's trilogy and telling the story that I tell.
Thank you.
So I hope those are helpful.
Yes, thank you, Paul.
Other questions? And all the PDF of the slides will come to you afterwards, so you'll get all the slides that I used today. Yeah, Beth. Beth Ayers, please. You have to unmute.
Thanks.
There you go.
So as we build groups and have people in them that are good leaders, how do we bring them out to actually lead?
So, I mean, one thing is helping people start to define themselves that way and understand what that role is. And some of the things I shared today might be helpful in helping people reframe their thinking about what leadership is and what it means to lead. I think the other thing is establishing kind of plans that recognize what are the key things that need to happen for us to be successful and who's going to own responsibility for those. And how do we, who's going to step up to take those pieces on and be accountable for them? And using that language of responsibility and accountability because it's at core to leadership. And I think the other thing is to continually build community within the group. And I'm sure a lot of you already do that, but make sure you check in with people at the beginning of meetings, using breakouts, using activities, using things in meetings that get people to be able to talk in small groups as well as a large group, because introverts don't do well in large groups initially. And you want to make sure everyone can kind of find ways to do things. Making sure in meeting design and meeting work, when you come together, you do things that create the space for people to share, to get to know each other, to share their own stories, to feel confident in their own stories, to see each other's assets. You know, you could do like that activity I did that you did in the breakout. You could do that with a group and have people introduce each other to the room at a meeting and introduce their partner based on their answers. And that's a way for people to get affirmed for what they have and start to see themselves differently. So there's a lot of things like that you can do that help do that. And both in my work at the Collective Impact Forum, where I've written a lot of articles, including one on facilitated meetings, and in the book, there's a lot of activities and things you can do to build leadership and help people find their leadership and voice. Thanks. Other questions? Oh yeah, Martin.
So any tips? I find often leadership is very scared of not having control over the situations. Yeah. And I'm sort of in this leadership place of like the cost of doing business is mistakes sometimes, to trust people to do their jobs and to you hire people for certain reasons. And I think I don't necessarily get it's not necessarily very opaque saying, I'm worried about having control over this, but the messaging gets there. And I'm trying to encourage more senior leadership and other people who are peers just to kind of, can we move away from this? Because we're going to be doing the same thing over and over and over again. We're never going to spread the work. So any tips for getting folks who are more senior or executive in business to buy into some of that?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for asking that. I in my experience, there's and I'm just putting a tool in the chat called the responsibility virus. So, and I'll explain in a moment. But one part of that is, you notice in my description of leadership, it's all about responsibility and accountability. You can't give someone leadership without them owning the responsibility and being willing and being accountable for it. And a lot of people will want leadership without accountability. That doesn't exist. That's not leadership. That's something else. And this tool that I just put in the chat called the responsibility virus comes from a book called the responsibility virus. It has this thing called a responsibility ladder that recognizes that what we often make the mistake of doing when we're in a management role is not matching capability and responsibility together. So someone who's new to my organization might have a lot of skills, but they haven't used them in our context. They don't know our language. They don't know our relationships. And they have to take steps in learning how we work before we can trust them fully to make decisions on their own. And it's not saying that their skills aren't strong. It's that they have to match their skills with our context and how we do things, right? Or there's other people who are young and we're hiring them new, and they've got to build the capability to be independent and hold that responsibility and be accountable for it. And this ladder is a way to support conversations with people to understand where are people at in terms of their decision-making authority, and what is it going to take to move up a rung. And so it's a way to work with people to move up a ladder of responsibility instead of just assuming or beginning with the idea that someone, because I've seen a lot of organizations set up people to fail by giving them too much responsibility beyond their capability. And again, when I say capability, I'm not saying someone is less than, I'm saying their skills and experience in this role they're having now needs more information and experience before they can, act independently. And that's just normal. And so that tool might be a helpful resource for you in that case.
I appreciate it. I was looking at it. I think that's helpful to kind of frame the conversation. That's exactly what I was looking for.
Great. Laura. I think you have to come off mute. Whoops, Laura, you were there.
I was trying to come off mute. It didn't want to for whatever reason.
Okay, now it did. Perfect. Hi, Laura.
Hi. Thank you for this. And one of the things that I noticed in our first breakout session was that I was 40 years older than the person I was in the room with, but our experiences were the same to
wow.
In our lifetime. So how, because I know sometimes, and we definitely need everybody at the table with our leadership, with our community impact and everything, our collaboration. How do we have the same story 4 decades apart? You know what I mean? So in order to be able to share that and honor that and be able to put best use, like you were talking about. So our experiences were the same, but not the same at all. So to be able to put that into our leaderships and our trading and our collective impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think that and thank you for that. And I think that what I find there is that, people emerge in all different ways and in all different spaces. And sometimes we emerge later. I certainly, as a child, did not consider myself a leader. and nor did I see that I had that capability. And I think that connecting around stories is so important. And again, when that happens in our life might be different, but the important thing is we have these shared experiences. And again, that it may have taken longer for some of us to find our voice, to find that we have that role. It's exciting when we do. But I appreciate you sharing that. Because I know we're coming up on time, I shared a link um, in the chat to an article I wrote a few years ago. That's about it was a reflection I had of what I learned from my recovery that helped me become a leader. And it was after a conversation I had with someone in DC who was asking why I saw things the way I saw them, and were saying that they saw me as someone who saw things very differently than normal. And I realized how much of it came from just that was the root of my leadership experience. And so happy to share that with all of you, and hope that that might be helpful to some in that way. I'm also just right now putting the slides in the chat, so those are there too for you to download. And I'm going to hand it back to Lachelle and the team to close us out, because I know we're almost at the top of the hour.
Yes, we are. Thank you so much, Paul. I know you're running to another meeting, so you can feel free to hop off if you like.
Thanks, everyone.
I am going to kind of just end out real quick, you guys. That's if I can get my slides back up for you. But when you close out, you will be going to, you'll be redirected to you will be redirected, I'm sorry, to our survey. But today at 2 o'clock, we have a great presentation that we're talking about our family partnership training institute, and that's happening right now at 2 o'clock.
It's actually at 2:30. Sorry.
It's at 2:30. I'm sorry. Thank you, Data, for saying that. 2:30. You have a little bit of time. You can scan the QR or follow the website, the link here to register and participate. And then for this institute, there's the application part of it, and you have to apply by November 15th. So please join us on that. It's based on a curriculum that's online currently with the Boston University. The next steps, you guys know that the recordings and the slides will be sent to you if you didn't pull them out of the chat, and we'll follow up with a letter. And last but not least, well, second to last, in December, we're going to start Differing Family Relationships Dynamics series. And the first dynamic series we're going to talk about is kinship care. And that's going to be December 18th, 2 p.m. Look for that flyer to come out for you to register to participate with us in December. Thank you again for your time. You can scan the QR code. SAMHSA does support us, but they do ask us to provide a survey feedbacks of the programming that we give to you guys. You can either scan this QR code, or when you close your screen, another link should pop up for you to take our survey. Thank you guys.
Before we log off, can you advise if there is a certificate of participation or CEU? Because I didn't see it in the chat.
Yes. After you, we don't offer CEUs with our programs, but we do have a certificate of attendance. But after you complete the survey, it will route you to, you can download your certificate, fill your name in it, print it, or save it to your computer.
Is there a link for the survey? Because I can't scan the QR code. I don't know how to do that with my phone.
When you close out of this meeting, it'll take you right to the link.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. You guys, I will keep this open for probably 1 more minute so that you guys can close out on your own and be redirected to the survey.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for attending. You too.
I'll see you at 2:30.
Great. That would be great. Yes.
Awesome.
And anyone else who's still on, we're having that Learning Institute
Can you put
at
that link
2:30.
in?
I sure can.
Thank you, Lachelle. Appreciate you.
Thank you, guys. So let me put it back up on the screen.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, can you guys see that?
That's for
That is
okay.
for the for the partnership, Family Partnership Training Institute.
Oh, okay, I'll get that right
Yeah.
now. Let me get that cue. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
All right, bye now.
Take care. All right, you guys, we have 1 more minute, 2:02. I'm going to close it out. I would prefer if you guys closed out on your own so that you can go straight to the survey without worrying about the QR code or filling out the typing it in. So I will go back to if you're still online and you want to scan it, you have about until 2:03 to scan. Okay, it looks like we probably have about 8 more you guys still online. If I close the webinar out, it's going to not take you to the survey.